So now that we've got our gain set and we're comfortable with the level, take us down the channel strip.
The next grouping of buttons now on this particular mixer, the next grouping of buttons we have here are our auxiliary outputs. Now what does that mean? Well, I like to think of this as the faucet out in the garage. I like to think of the next one as the faucet in the bathroom downstairs. You know, these are just other places that we can send our signal other than the kitchen sink. So,
assuming the kitchen sink is where you'd want to hear your main mix.
Assuming the kitchen sink is where the main mix is.
That's right. When I'm out in the garage, I always like to make sure that I hear, you know, the monitor mix. So I'm glad you're clarifying that.
That's
for
right.
us.
Now these are just additional outputs that we can send various places. The most common place we send this is to the monitor speakers on stage, so that the performers can hear, you know, what's going on. Now you might say, well, why don't you just take that off of this off of the main mix? Well,
good question.
Good question.
You going to answer it?
Sure.
Thank you.
The reason you wouldn't do that is because what the musicians need to hear on stage might be totally different than what you need to hear out in the house, and out for the audience to listen to.
And feedback just might be an issue.
And feedback might be an issue, and you can independently adjust the volume that you're sending, the sound that you're sending to the monitor, to the performer, independently of what you're sending out to the audience.
Yep. If I can interject here, you know, in personal experience, I've found that vocalists really need a lot of generally keyboard or piano. They mainly need that to stay on pitch. And if they're background vocalists and there's a main vocalist, they need quite a bit of the main vocalist to make sure they can cut off together and all of those things. So by doing that, then I can turn the piano up really hot in the monitor mix while I keep it at its properly mixed level in the main speaker system.
Yep. Now, yeah, when we're talking about monitors a little bit here, Gary, just a little bit more of advanced techniques like what you're referring to. Monitor speakers usually have to have a little bit of rhythm in there. So like you said, the piano is one of the main things you'd like to put in the monitor speaker for the performers to hear.
Rhythm and pitch, you bet.
Another thing that I usually put in a little bit is a little bit of kick drum and a little bit of snare drum. The snare drum is a nice bright time, you know, it keeps the time.
It's almost like
nice
a metronome.
Nice and bright, and it comes through the mix, and so people on stage can all stay in time. And then there's various instruments that you probably don't need in the monitors. You don't need the trumpets and the trombones and the saxophones if you're mixing a band of that sort. Some of the things like that you typically don't need in the monitors. Usually you want to put in the monitors just what musicians need to be, be effective in doing their job on stage.
You bet.
But that's what having an auxiliary button up here, that's what that allows us to do. It allows us to keep the sound cleaner on stage, put in the monitors just what we need, and then allows us to do independent stuff down here in the house mix.
Yep. Well, doing that though, there's a term, and since we're on monitors, let's go into this, that people find very confusing.
Yes.
And that is pre and post fade. So if you'd like to delve into that, and then I'll save my explanation of philosophy just in case it doesn't match up.
Pre and post fade is a pretty, it's a difficult concept to teach without actually having sound running through the mixer. Let's give it a shot. If this particular monitor send or aux send, if it is what we call pre-fader, now a fancy word for the volume control down here is fader.
Right.
And if we say this is pre-fader, what that means is that the sound coming out of this volume control happens before this fader down here, the volume control down here.
Or independent.
Independently of. So no matter what I do down here, it doesn't change what comes out of this, the channel up, the monitor output out here.
Yep.
And that's typically what you do with a monitor speaker. So any changes you make in the house mix aren't making drastic changes in the monitor speaker for the performers. Also, when the performers walk up to the microphone and they tap on the microphone a little bit, they hear it out of their monitor speaker, even if your sound guy's not paying attention.
Which would never happen.
No.
Of course.
Or if the microphone is turned down so that you don't get the stage noise, when they walk up to the microphone, they hear a little something out of that monitor speaker. It gives them the assurance that it's actually on and working. Now
post-fade.
Post-fade means that the sound coming out of this monitor's aux send happens after the volume control down here, after the fader control. Now what that means is I can turn this up here. I can be sending this channel down to the monitor speaker, but there's no sound that's going to come out of this until I turn it up down here.
And it happens in proportion.
It happens in proportion to the main volume control down here. So if it's post-fade, when I make movements down here, it changes what is coming out of the auxiliary up here as well. Someplace you might want to use that as far as recording a tape. If you're sending this output to a tape recording, you know, and this is the pastor's mic, for example, when the pastor, when the hymns come and you turn the pastor down, now you've turned this auxiliary down too, and you're not getting the pastor with his horrible voice singing on tape.
And Jeff is not referring to every pastor, you know, across America, but
most pastors are pretty good.
Good recovery there. I want to make sure we don't get in trouble here. But I know that if I was up there singing, Jeff not only would turn the microphone off, he would probably throw something at me to get me to close my mouth, because I do sing that bad. It is true. You know, another application I can think of that is like if you have a nursery send or a send out in the lobby. You know, the worst case scenario that can happen there is if you do not have that in a post fade, is you can actually pull the fader down, and the pastor could go sit down, and it's not going to come out of the main speakers, but in the nursery, his mic would still be on. So he could, you know, be sitting down and lean over to his wife and, you know, be talking about what's for lunch that day, and the people in the nursery would then know that it was roast beef day, not corned beef hash day.
That's correct. So that's what the pre and the post fader means. Pre means the volume control down here has no effect.
Right, post, or pre-fader is how I like to call it. And so it happens before the fader, so the fader has no impact.
Or post-fader.
Which is after the fader, and the fader has every impact on it.
That's correct. Now, sometimes on mixer boards, like on this one, we've got a little button that's kind of buried in here. And what that does is it allows us to select whether it's pre or post.
Right, and you'll need to check with your mixing board and in the manual at your channel to see if the auxiliary is dedicated as pre or post, or you can see here if it's switchable, because then you can set up those auxiliaries to use them properly.
Yep. So we've got our just to recap. We've set the water pressure in our pipeline.
Yep.
And we've sent it out to all the other various places, and we've determined whether or not the kitchen faucet controls what goes on in the garage.
Which could or could not be a good thing.
Which could or could not be a good thing.